Hey, folks. Welcome back. Uh, as I've shared before, now we're going to get into the meat of really how you lead organizations in service of our nation's powerful purpose, and not just as a whim, but as a way to actually save the republic and unlock the full potential of your people and your organization. So, as mentioned, uh, this is just the beginning. There are ways to go deeper right now. So you can begin to activate the Bison way with purpose and belonging throughout your entire employee population. Begin to empower them to bring their full self to work. And as we'll explore, there's lots of really good reasons to do that. You can also engage more deeply with consulting or bring me in to do a keynote or workshop. And yeah, my hope is that this starts to marinate and rattle around, and that you start to think about your next couple quarters of business differently and start to do things differently that serve you, serve your organization, and really kind of serve the humanity of the people that you are in charge of. So we'll begin again, as always, with our kind of whole person orientation and to check in on the pies: physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. And I invite you to do this with me. So after I'm complete, press pause, check in with yourself or someone close to you. Let's see. Physically, uh, a mix of fatigue and being energized, a little foggy. Let's see if my mouth works today. So fatigue is because I had an awesome time last night. The scotch flowed freely. It was my birthday, and I was hanging out with my mom and my wife, and went to this really great place for dinner. Um, I ate a giant fillet and amazing salad. So yeah, feeling a little tired. Like I said, the scotch was flowing last night. Intellectually, so after dinner we went to go see the kind of live performance of Lion King, which I've seen the movie a dozen times and always enjoyed, but was noticing just kind of the contrast between Mufasa and Scar. And yes, there are characters in this thing, but what I'm sitting with right now is that more of like an archetypal inquiry, like, where am I like Mufasa? Where am I more like Scar? So, thinking about them is almost kind of two energies within me. And there are some parallels that we'll explore today around the eagle and bison as well. Um, yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about. Emotionally grateful. Just, I felt really honored yesterday. Um, my mom and wife really, yeah, really made me feel special. So my love tank is full. Um, Also, right before I started recording this, I just got off with six CEOs that are in a Harvard Business School program. So one of the things I do is I facilitate CEO circles, and this one was on vulnerability, and I was just blown away by how about 80% of the folks there really were vulnerable. Shared about you know learning disabilities, shared about mortgaging their house to keep their business afloat, um, driving a cab. Uh, Folks in family businesses wondering like what is their own sense of purpose and legacy and impact. And yeah, they got a lot out of that, and so they're developing some really powerful connections with each other that will I hope um, sustain them and provide them with the support that they need to lead with vulnerability and purpose. Um, yeah, spiritually, yeah, still aces. Even though it was a little foggy this morning, my morning ritual was great. Um, yeah, I feel a really deep spiritual connection to the purpose of the United States, and it just feels good to spend time with it. So I'm in. So I invite you to pause, check in with yourself or a friend. So let's dive in. Chapter 4. Uh, as mentioned, the first 3 chapters are more background, to really get the central narratives going on here in our economy and our nation. Why culture matters, why the bison matters, why business matters. And now we're going to get more tactical. Like, all right, what's actually going on inside? And that's the title of this chapter is Bison at Work. White guys won't work here anymore. Wait, what? What do you mean? I said to a friend who heads talent for a multinational technology company. I was shocked to hear that, as her company had a great reputation. She continues, this month I had 2 white guys from Texas turn down great offers because the company wasn't diverse enough. I never thought I'd see the day when white guys are saying they need women and people of color on their teams. Holy cow! I just got chills, I exclaimed. She replied, I've been harping on this for years. I've been telling our CHRO, so Chief Human Resources Officer, that the time would come when we've fallen too far behind in creating a place that attracts diverse talent. This time has obviously come because of the racial tensions in society that we explored in the last chapter. 90% of white male workers currently place some value on DEI, with 42% who believe that it is very or extremely important to them. Additionally, 55% of all employees and 45% of white employees believe that racism at work has damaged their relationship with their employer. Now, 4 in 10 white employees avoid employers who don't take a stand against racism, which far exceeds the 25% tipping point threshold required for a belief or behavior to penetrate an entire population. So pause there for a second. This is happening. Folks demand equitable workplaces. 4 in 10. 4 in 10 white folks are like, this place has got to work for all of us. So even though we have this history to face and repair and heal, we're beyond the tipping point. This is happening. This is going to come for every single organization. So just know that this isn't like a choice. It's like it's coming. The question is, what are we going to do about it? While racial and political tribalism in broader society are on the rise, it appears that there is something hopeful happening inside organizations. It appears that many are ready for a change, but the Eagle's norms and institutions and cultures haven't yet evolved to meet this new paradigm. And this gives me hope. If there is any silver lining to the 2020 summer of protests, is that we shook the tree of liberty, and a bunch of aspiring white allies fell out to defend it. It certainly happened to me and Mike, my conservative CEO friend. We were part of 2020's bumper harvest of white folks committed to change. Many of us deepened our learning, reading White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. We formed book clubs, joined ERGs, took inclusion trainings, joined our local SURGE chapter, which is showing up for racial justice. My wife is actually on the leadership team for our San Diego chapter. Donated to organizations like Black Lives Matter, National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples, and the Equal Justice Initiative. And some of us took to the streets alongside our BIPOC friends and family. Public support for Black Lives Matter increased to 55% by September of 2020, which is up from 43% in 2016. Corporations followed suit, announcing over 100,000 new DEI roles, and issued bold statements and initiatives pledging $50 billion to see it through. However, due to the white backlash in the organization and investors, disinformation, and other pandemic-related priorities, their progress has stalled. So I think I mentioned this before, but I'm going to reprise it again. Of that 50 billion, 0.5% has been spent. Of the 400 or 500 CEOs who took a stand against those elected representatives who supported the insurrection, I think only 8 remain. So something happened, and then there was a retrenchment. But people want it. But leadership hasn't fulfilled. They've backed down. So what is an organization to do? Traditionally, DEI meant recruiting at historically black colleges and universities, providing mentorship, forming ERGs, and paying living wages. Today, these are simply table stakes. In light of our cascading crises, today's workers want to be part of something that matters. They want to join a mission they can easily find on Maslow's needs hierarchy or the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and to be part of a team where everyone belongs and everyone is supported to do their best work. Of course, these have always been concerns for women and people from the LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC communities. Now, it matters to almost all of us, especially younger folks. If the culture of a business stinks, which we can easily tell from listening to industry gossip, reading the company's website, and checking out Glassdoor ratings, we keep looking. And companies have tried to fix the symptoms of their broken cultures with lame proclamations, ginned up by consultants and marketing teams. They've tried individual interventions like games, apps, free food, mentorship, and volunteering opportunities. And ultimately, these tactical point solutions failed to produce substantial and sustained results because they sat on top of the eagle's nest of divisive, dysfunctional, and dehumanizing business practices. With the eagle's underlying biases privileging whites and men, and cultural norms like always on, impress the boss, similarity bias. Similarity bias is basically you form relationships with people you have the most in common with. So, for example, when I went to business school in New York, I ended up finding other Midwesterners. And I lived with someone from Wisconsin, someone from Missouri, and someone from Minnesota. Now, I could have lived with someone from Argentina or Uzbekistan, but similarity bias had me find people who are like me, and that's what we do by default. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be very problematic in organizations that have a inclusion commitment. As well as the systems, the profit principle, quarterly earnings reports, performance reviews, quotas. Individuals don't stand, or is to say, individual interventions don't stand a chance because there's this interlocking eagle thing happening in most organizations. We are experiencing a whole system failure, but few companies recognize it. Most companies still think that more individual interventions are the answer. We cannot ice cream social our way out of a toxic culture. We can't app our way out of long hours. We can't pill our way out of a crappy boss. We can't hire our way out of employee burnout turnover. We can't blog our way out of racism. We can't deck chair our way out of a hull breach. We need to think holistically about the problem. It's time for a new way. To do this, we must remember that, like the bison, we are also a herd species. We exist by, for, and through each other. We need each other, and we always have. The neuroscience of empathy reveals that when one of us suffers, we all suffer. As such, people's strategies must now be reimagined with a holistic and social approach. A few innovative companies, such as Coursera, have begun to swing the pendulum from the eagle to the bison, revealing the increasing number of dependencies between DEI, leadership development, corporate social responsibility, wellness, talent management, and culture. They understand that each needs to be reimagined and will inform and intersect with each other. For example, it is now well understood that that pollution and climate change have disproportionate impacts on people of color, and systemic racism has been named a public health crisis. Accordingly, Coursera is dissolving HR silos and is actively crafting new ways to care for the whole person and community. Wellness initiatives are now informed by and amplify the priorities of DEI, CSR, talent, L&D. L&D is moving towards inclusive social wellness, culture-forward pedagogy. Talent, workforce planning, policies for hiring, performance management, promotion, and compensation now include culture, DEI, and learning goals. DEI strategies are addressing more than biases and behavior change. They're also informing culture and learning and wellness and marketing and supply chain and product development. It's still too early to tell the results, but at least Coursera is asking the right questions and thinking holistically, systemically, socially. Before we explore the particulars of what life looks like when the pendulum swings towards the bison, let's do a thorough audit to assess our starting point. Granted, most organizations are somewhere between the eagle and bison. It is still illustrative to see where we've come from and where we're headed. Eagle at work. Although HR folks are in general incredibly thoughtful, kind, self-aware, and compassionate, the systems and cultures in which they operate are frequently individualistic, allopathic, and dehumanizing. Employees are often regarded as capital, as objects, as selfish, interchangeable children who are expected to leave everything important to them, such as their love lives, souls, families, communities, faiths, and nation, at the door. Further, the default is to consider them to be immune from the ongoing social and economic dynamics of the world, such as flat wages, skyrocketing housing, education and transportation costs, police brutality, climate change, income inequality, political corruption, systemic sexism, and racism. Eagle HR has spent the last 30 years attempting individual interventions, so point solutions like, oh, that's wrong, let's fix it, to address the collective failures of the entire system. This approach assumes that if we're uneducated, we simply need to learn information from superior beings like experts and trainers, or book authors. We might be doing that right now. If we're unhappy, then a pill, a program, or an app will turn our frowns upside down. The assumption is that there is nothing unique about any of us, and that when we come to work, we are tabula rasa, a blank slate, interchangeable cogs without any need for purpose or belonging. In light of the decades of flat wages, increasing job insecurity, and the decay of society, we have a general fear of HR's power over our income, housing, and healthcare, and a general insecurity about our worth and value to the company. So we hedge our bets. We play cover your ass, CYA, put in FaceTime, and withhold our best ideas and dissenting opinions for fear of upsetting our superiors. In my experience, this is even more true for folks with less privileged backgrounds. What's commonly called code switching, or just being much more risk averse. So female leaders, people of color, I've seen them do this even more. So there's a lot of racist and sexist impacts of having a toxic culture. When our efforts are insufficient or we miss our targets, we regard our emotions as bad, our failings as moral and personal, and ourselves as always needing to work harder or at least maintain the appearance of working hard. As you might imagine, this dynamic does not serve us well and is marked by high levels of stress, burnout, disengagement, and employee turnover. Now let's take a closer look, exploring a few key HR functions. Eagle L&D. That's learning and development. Eagle L&D separates us and treats us as individual students who learn from experts in live or virtual classrooms. We are given information and then tested on it. We pass or fail, and sometimes we get a certificate or badge to put on our intranet or LinkedIn profile. Unfortunately, because we forget 90% of everything we learn within 7 days. So 90% gone. And since most trainings are one-offs or outside of the flow of work, it's fair to say that a great portion of the 367 billion global L&D industry is wasted. Further, Eagle L&D frequently allocates resources in an elitist fashion, with cheap, ineffective, and boring e-learning, of which only 3.8% is engaging, for frontline and low-wage employees, who are, again, typically more female and diverse. Whereas expensive training programs, off-sites, and one-on-one coaching are provided exclusively to executives and high potential leaders, who are typically more male and white, thereby enforcing the existing inequities. Let's look at Eagle DEI. Eagle DEI typically includes hiring quotas, mentoring, ERGs, anonymous reporting systems, and compliance training. It's heavy on one-time discrimination, systemic racism, and unconscious bias training, which have been proven to be a waste of time, as most people revert back to their biased behaviors within 24 hours of the training. This reversion happens because human moral and intuitive reasoning is rooted not in logic or selfishness or even altruism, but rather in the norms of our group. We each have an internal, subconscious, moral calculus that has us make decisions based on the center of gravity present in our peer, family, community, or work groups. So without changing the culture and the systems and the norms, folks revert back to their previous biased behavior following a breakthrough experience or intervention. Further, these trainings often do not meaningfully address the just world fallacy, which is kind of the secular counterpart to the prosperity gospel, wherein people think good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. The result is that however well-intended DEI programs are, and despite the occasional breakthroughs, they are not enough to overcome the beliefs and norms that link success and goodness, which is also maleness and whiteness. Another often ignored bias is the better than average effect, where most of us believe we are kinder and more just than the average person, and or we don't have many biases compared to the average person. Research has shown that we consistently underestimate our gender and racial biases, and that those with the strongest prejudices are more likely to underestimate their biases. Additionally, Eagle DEI is premised on the unspoken assumption that somehow folks in the in-group, folks like me, white, male, cisgendered heterosexuals, when delivered a training on systemic racism, will somehow just get it. Like I'm really going to get what it's like to live under 400 years of white supremacist apartheid. Like, no. I can understand it. I'm not going to get it. Nor could I get it. I can empathize. I can advocate, sponsor, aspire to be an ally, a co-conspirator, but I'm not going to get that pain. I'm not going to get what it's like to grow up as a second class or third or fourth or fifth class citizen. I'm never going to get that. The thinking goes that somehow hearts of white folks and men will just magically open, and new actions, structures, and equity will just quickly ensue. Instead, we need to unlearn everything we've learned about U.S. history and capitalism and start over. As we explored in chapters 1 and 2, the invention of whiteness, manifest destiny, the genocide, slavery, Jim Crow, and the preschool to prison pipeline in schools have as much to do with our culture, the lived experience of our team members, and the biases that they and their families must navigate on a daily basis. That has as much to do with who they are and how they show up as their roles, responsibilities, and performance. But re-education alone isn't enough. To create true solidarity, we need to nurture relationships among diverse folks, share life and work experiences, work together on something that matters to all of us, understand our cultural differences, and develop new group norms. It's not about white folks getting it. We're never going to get the experience of BIPOC folks, LGBTQIA plus folks, women. White guys just aren't going to get it. That cannot ever fully happen. Solidarity is about humility, knowing we'll never fully get it, no matter how many books we read, black folks we befriend, or museums we visit. Solidarity occurs when we do the opposite of divide and conquer. It occurs when we connect across difference over time, acknowledge and feel our shared humanity, and recognize that we are all suffering under the eagle's norms and institutions. When we do, we embrace the value and dignity of every human life and understand that a person's level of health and success has a great deal to do with the circumstances of their upbringing, as well as the privileges extended or denied to them. Solidarity is about acknowledgement and commitment, making a firm declaration to stand with folks who are on the receiving end of white supremacy, and committing to end it in all its forms. But that is not the way of the eagle. Eagle, DEI, separates diverse populations into ERGs, creating insular personal networks, and edifying our nation's history of division and secrecy and mistrust between groups. For example, like the poor Irish were elevated in status by law and encouraged to join our frontier rangers and slave patrols and strike-breaking militias and police to harass, oppress, and kill BIPOC folks. It is also paternalistic, such as when we treat people like children who are behaving or performing poorly, and we separate the troublemakers. Diverse people just need jobs, mentorship, ERGs, training, and money to become more professional, aka act white. And white people need more mandatory one-time discrimination and bias trainings to magically eliminate our racist biases. While mentoring is desired and impactful for diverse candidates, it actually reduces their tenure. Eagle DEI does indeed provide information and skills to people, but because it is not centered in purpose, folks don't see inclusion as an expression of their identity, but rather something outside of it, exogenous to it. It also doesn't create high-trust connections between diverse people, so it produces conscious and unconscious resistance to diverse groups and DEI initiatives as a whole. Given all this, it's no surprise that the $8 billion annual DEI spend has resulted in neutral to negative outcomes over the last 2 decades and is likely making matters worse. Now, let's pause here. I love DEI folks. Love hanging out with them. A lot of them get it. They're like, yeah, this is checkbox tokenism. Like, this is not really moving the needle at all. And so it's not their fault. It's just they have been asked to do the second hardest job in the company and get paid about a 30th of the top highest job, which is the CEO generally. So DEI folks, keep doing the good work. Obviously, we're going to explore some new approaches here in the next couple chapters. And just know it's not your fault. You've been assigned an impossible task. And my hope is that by naming it here, we can build the broader cultural systemic support that you need to actually achieve the goals. So now let's look at Eagle culture. The Eagle way of developing culture is not to develop culture. Instead, culture is frequently ignored, or if it's acknowledged at all, it's an afterthought or quickly deprioritized. Sure, ice cream socials, holiday parties, volunteering, town halls, and happy hours have some benefits. They're excellent opportunities to take a break from the routine, and when done well, are great ways to recognize people's contributions and foster a common purpose. However, these occasions rarely involve intentional relationship development beyond icebreakers like two truths and a lie, or treasure hunts, or three-legged races, or bingo. Regardless of how well they're done, and due to their infrequency, on Monday, people go right back to the old paradigm. And yet, relationships do indeed form at work, and culture does indeed develop. Without being explicitly addressed and cultivated, similarity bias forms around these lowest common denominators of age, race, gender, politics, sexuality, and ensuring that insular packs form. All you have to do is stand up on a chair at your next company event and observe who is talking to who. White sales folks talking to white marketing folks. Asian engineers talking to Asian quality control folks. Black customer service reps talking to black administrative assistants. And those with the most power holding court in the corner with their direct reports, or what I initially put in was lackeys. But I made that a little less sharp. So I just want to pause here. Like, I just did a bunch of generalizing, but it's really to draw out how much similarity bias does this. Of course, folks are building relationships across difference. It's just not our natural way of doing things. This results in a culture of disparate tribes, resisting change, and edifying existing exclusionary power dynamics. Moreover, the role of the office mom is typically not part of anyone's title, so it gets assumed by or voluntold to lower status folks. Typically, these are white women who add these responsibilities onto their already packed schedules and unbalanced workloads. Without any time, staff, or budget to think it through, it gets done quickly at best and expresses the tastes, like food, music, activities, and the unconscious biases of those in charge. This further edifies the dynamic that culture doesn't matter because A, it's done poorly, and B, it's driven by someone with relatively low status, and or C, it doesn't include everyone, and least of all, remote workers. This dynamic is part of what causes remote workers to have 50% fewer friends than workers in offices. At its worst, this becomes an opportunity for office moms to flex their biases and relative power by allocating budgets for 4th of July activities, but none for Juneteenth or Pride, for Christmas and Hanukkah, but none for Diwali, Eid, or Kwanzaa. The message is that only what is rooted in whiteness, heterosexuality, and the Judeo-Christian tradition matters. Makes me sad. Because I've experienced it, as I'm sure many of you have. All right, Eagle Wellness. The ethos of Eagle Wellness is, quote, work as hell, eat some broccoli, exercise, take a pill, and get back to work. This is reflective of our sick care industry, which addresses the symptoms of our atomized, poorly and micromanaged, soulless and dehumanizing workplaces. It labels and stigmatizes mental illness, psychological languishing, and physical illness, and produces a culture of denial and victim blaming. It treats the crises of connection and fulfilling work as individual failures. It assumes that if we're not healthy, happy, and productive, then we, the employees, are to blame. So it doles out tips and tools and podcasts, apps, hacks, and pills to get us back on the job, but doesn't give us what we actually need to cure our burnout and languishing, which is fewer hours, bullshit-free roles, living wages, purpose, and belonging. Research shows that individual interventions designed to increase happiness and improve mental health may actually make us more lonely and unhappier. In this way, Eagle Wellness is indistinguishable from the efforts of agricultural veterinarians, whose job is to make the animals we eat just well enough to be exploited or slaughtered. As work and money are the top causes of stress, it should be no surprise that few turn to their abuser for comfort. Despite 97% of us being unhealthy, 84% of us being stressed, and 49% of us not making a living wage, only 24% of us make use of our wellness benefits. Although a handful of great award-winning wellness programs exist and are part of a holistic culture of purpose, transformation, connection, balance, and health, most wellness programs face the daunting task of marshaling comparatively little time, power, and budget to combat the eagle's perfect storm of hyper-individualism, overwork, job insecurity, and systemic biases and income inequality. As many of you know, the pandemic revealed and exacerbated many of these eagle impacts. According to a June 2021 Gartner study, 85% of us have experienced higher levels of burnout since the beginning of the pandemic. 41% of us have lower trust in our teams. 40% of us have reported declines in our work-life balance. 37% of us have lower trust in leadership. 34% of us experience a decline in psychological safety. And 31% of us reported less inclusion. Of course, like nearly all dynamics in our nation, women, children, and communities of color are disproportionately impacted. So I just read one yesterday. The pandemic has erased the last 20 years of progress in science and math for 9-year-olds. They're just like all the gains we made up until 2002, I should say all the gains from 2002 to 2022 were just erased. So despite unemployment rates reaching one second. So despite unemployment rates reaching all-time lows, those who are most vulnerable still suffer the most. Women experience greater levels of sleep disruption, depression, and anxiety than men during the pandemic. Drug overdoses in the Black community have skyrocketed. Life expectancy in BIPOC communities has dropped by about 3 years. Between 2019 and 2021, math declined by 17 percentile points proficiency in math declined by 17 percentile points for Hispanic students, 15 percentile points for Black students, and 14 percentile points for Native American students, turning what was an academic achievement gap into like a chasm. Another study by McKinsey revealed similar drops in reading proficiency. The pandemic has also likely erased the last 6 years of DEI progress. As I mentioned, most HR folks are generally kind, inclusive, and heart-centered. And there are multiple bright spots swinging the pendulum towards the bison. So this isn't an indictment of HR professionals or DEI folks, but rather an indictment of the manner in which the eagle pervades our business logic, our corporate structures, and our legacy people processes. It's an indictment of the logic that says individuals are to blame for systemic issues. It's a rebuke of the victim blaming that results from throwing apps and intranet tips at systemic problems. This is a call to end the madness. It's mad. Absolutely mad. If our nation didn't have a powerful purpose to be a place of flourishing, equity, and unity, to be a democratic and multicultural beacon for the world, then we could avoid responsibility for this systemic oppression and just chalk it up to man's inhumanity to man. The thing is, we do have that powerful purpose. We do indeed have a noble purpose, so treating people in this way is out of integrity with who we say we are and lacks moral imagination. It's time for the bison. Instead of treating people like they are broken and blaming them for perishing in a toxic culture, instead of driving people apart through elitist and ineffective L&D approaches that presume there's nothing unique about people and ignores the liberating power of purpose and small, diverse peer group learning, instead of driving people apart through anonymous reporting systems, paternalistic mentoring programs, and one-time compliance trainings, instead of driving people apart by allowing similarity bias to form geographical, racial, and political tribes, instead of driving people who suffer mentally and physically into shame and isolation by telling them that they are on their own to fix their broken selves with individual interventions. Let's treat them like adults with souls, trauma, families, and communities. Let's bring them together, empower them to heal, activate their purpose at work, and nurture our shared humanity. So, just pause here for a second. The greatest untapped potential in the organization is employee well-being and flourishing. And what I mean by that is that the lion's share of human potential is being wasted. Bullshit jobs, systemic racism, sexism. So, let's call it like 80% of human potential is wasted. And what we're missing is that when we are given the opportunity to heal and empower one another, we get to fulfill our own potential. It doesn't take a bunch of smart MBAs in a room to fulfill a person's potential. People actually can do this together and without expensive, coaches, trainers, and consultants. We'll get into some of that data here soon. So, the bison at work. To do this, we must think holistically and get at the source of what people need to flourish. A balanced, bullshit-free workload, living wages, flexibility, meaning, connection, and care. We all need to believe that we matter and are a part of something larger that matters. The bison way is one of relationships versus the eagle's outputs, of covenants versus the eagle's contracts. It's about establishing our personal covenant with our unique purpose and with each other around a shared mission. It's the way of nurturing a healthy culture where each of us can activate and fulfill our purpose on the job, enjoy rich connections with one another. We must now avail ourselves of the research and an emerging set of best practices, in which we'll explore in greater detail in the next chapter, so that we can come together across differences to serve an aligned vision, empowering cross-functional teams to achieve common goals and objectives, and actively nurture care, trust, and autonomy. This means multiple business and people metrics. No single business unit or function can address workload, bullshit, belonging, inclusion, productivity, flourishing, innovation, wellness, employee engagement, or attraction and retention. They all must align in order to create true systemic and culture change. With this orientation, let's imagine how the Bison Way could look and feel by function. Bison L&D. Work becomes a source of community, solidarity, self-discovery, fulfillment, and professional growth. People view their organization as a place where they can activate their purpose, belong, and continually learn, do their best work, develop authentic relationships with diverse peers. Learning is sourced in purpose and values and happens continuously over time and in the flow of work versus in an external, one-time context. We center career development in each individual's unique purpose and values, develop purpose-shaped roles versus a disconnected list of bullshit tasks. As purposeful work is desired across the economic spectrum, learning is delivered in an egalitarian fashion, where people at each level of an organization, as I mentioned, I've done this with C-suite folks. I've done this with new hires. I should say we, my colleagues and I, where people at each level and wherever they work come together to activate their purpose and values at work. And because it is grounded in purpose, identity, and relationships and delivered over time, the concepts and skills are embodied as expressions of identity and purpose. They build upon each other and are translated into action and are retained within their work relationships as norms and habits. In practice, this means peers at each level of the organization, from new hire to manager to director, vice president to senior leadership, are sorted into small, diverse peer groups. Each group then experiences a program together as a cohort, developing group agreements, learning new concepts, completing exercises that empower them to discover new aspects of their purpose and values, take new purpose-aligned actions at work, and then have an hour-long peer-facilitated conversation following a discussion guide. So just imagine you're in a group of 4, and these other 3 people are as different from you as possible, but at the same relative peer level. You move together through a program as a team. So there's social accountability. And because you're meeting every couple of weeks, you're applying what you're learning on the job, learning about each other, and debriefing that in your group meetings. So it's a social learning approach, and there are many types of social learning approaches. But as we'll explore in the next chapter, the research that suggests this small, diverse group of 4 doing self-reflection and then self-action and then self-disclosure in these small groups is the best way. I'm open to being wrong about that, but I think I've seen all the research. And of course, there are people doing great work with other approaches, but this is what the research shows, and the research that has informed our work at Unity Lab. Bison DEI. Work is compassionate, inclusive, forgiving, and is centered on belonging. People who feel like they belong are 3 times as likely to say they intend to stay for 5 years. Bison DEI doesn't punch white people in the nose and label them as racists. Rather, belonging and inclusion are baked into everything the company does. From people development to culture to L&D to product development to sales to finance to operations to supply chain to marketing to even meeting design. As purpose, empathy, and inclusion are the foundation of diverse relationships, collaboration, hiring, development, promotion, diverse peers learn skills together, work together, share their experiences, their purpose and values, empathize with and respect each other, and form diverse, lasting, and authentic relationships. Bison culture. Imagine if work was fun. Really. Like, imagine if it was healing. If work was sourced in relationships as opposed to tasks and outcomes. Imagine if people felt like they belonged. They could bring their whole self to work. And they genuinely liked the other people they work with. And were inspired by their shared impact. Imagine if diverse peers across departments were regularly learning together and developing a sense of the organization's mission, history, structure, and the interdependence of the various departments and geographies. This is possible, and the results are inspiring. When peers activate and share their purposes and values and find their unique connection to the organization's mission and values, this results in a 333% increase in alignment with the organization's mission. 50% more meaningful work relationships, a 7.4-month increase in tenure, resulting in a dynamic culture that delivers a 3x return to shareholders. In these ways, we can recognize the transformative power of relationships and experience the healing power of community. We can nurture relationships as the foundation of leadership, learning, inclusion, culture, and health. When we cherish our relationships and lean on them, we realize that they are this ever-present well that heals us. relationships become the foundation of our joy, growth, comfort, and laughter. Bison wellness. Work makes us happier and healthier. Research suggests that nurturing culture through connection, caring, and contribution is the key to our social and emotional health. When diverse peers learn together, they develop high-trust relationships across differences. And 94% of folks feel comfortable sharing their fears and anxieties with their diverse peers, and they discover new perspectives on their challenges. Even more, deep connections and check-ins in their peer groups empower them to complete their stress cycles and avoid burnout. And especially in light of the trauma related to the pandemic, racial injustice, white backlash, group interventions can be a meaningful driver of post-traumatic growth. So let's pause there for a second. As I've shared before, we're all traumatized by the eagle. We have all been acutely traumatized by the pandemic, by George Floyd's murder, by the loss of family and friends. I don't know anyone who hasn't lost anyone close to them. So providing people with the opportunity to connect about what really matters to them, their purpose, their values, their stories, all the stuff that they historically have left out of the office, is deeply healing. It allows us to process our traumas, to tell the stories, to share what's most important to us, and to grieve what we've lost. I'm not saying this is unsupervised group therapy. It's not. But I am really surprised with a lot of the therapeutic impacts that come out of this. So dive into some of this research now. By activating purpose, folks see a 538% increase in emotional regulation, a 539% increase in resilience. Purpose is also correlated with 32% fewer doctor's visits and 61% fewer hospital overnights. When people build diverse relationships, they become socially integrated, which is another powerful driver of cognitive function, longevity, and resulting in the increase that a person will reach 85 by 41%. So it's basically about 8 to 10 years of life people experience when they're socially integrated. Similarly, a meta-analysis of 148 studies on social networks and mortality revealed that people with strong social networks have a 91% greater chance of survival from disease than those with weak social networks. When we combine the sustained small group approaches with purpose activation and the resulting 7-year bump that purpose also provides, a 7-year longevity bump, we have a powerful recipe for longevity and vitality, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But to do this, we have to be guided by the bison. With an authentic and clearly communicated vision, a culture of purpose, belonging, and autonomy, work now has the potential to rehumanize us and drive our national renewal. Guided by the bison, we shape business units as communities. We develop roles around souls. We build a legacy through our impact on each other, on our customers, communities, and planet. The Bison Way begins and ends with people. People living on purpose and in deep relationship to each other are the drivers of innovation and collaboration. A culture of purpose recognizes that for any of us to thrive and belong, we all must thrive and belong. Before the pandemic, this chapter may have sounded like a bunch of warm, fuzzy platitudes. However, the pandemic revealed countless ways that we have been broken by the eagle. As such, the way of the bison provides nourishing food for our souls and healing for the soul of our nation. With this picture of where you and your organization might be headed if you choose to be guided by the bison, let's take a deeper dive into the twin drivers of flourishing, purpose and belonging. Okay, Chapter 4 summary. Traditional DEI approaches, or traditional approaches to DEI, L&D, wellness, and culture are dehumanizing and ineffective, perpetuating harm and wasting billions of dollars. The pandemic revealed how much our children, female, and BIPOC friends and colleagues are suffering and have always suffered under the eagle. People strategies must be broken down and recreated from the ground up to be more social, inclusive, empathetic, and purpose-driven. By activating bison-led approaches to learning, DEI, wellness, and culture, we become more fulfilled and connected, reach our full potential, do our best work, and heal the soul of our nation. Chapter 4, Reflection Questions. This is for you and your book buddy or your book club. What is your experience of traditional EAGLE, DEI, L&D, wellness, and culture approaches? What possibilities do you see for your organization's impact if your people strategy was guided by the bison? How might you feel? How might you feel differently about HR if your organization was guided by the bison? What actions could you take to move your organization towards a more humanistic and connected people strategy? So that's chapter 4, folks. Thanks for being with us, or with me. And again, if you want to engage more deeply, bring this work into your organizations, links in the description. Also, if you want to join a book club or bring me in to speak or lead a workshop, always happy to do that. I look forward to connecting with you in chapter 5, where we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of purpose and belonging. Take care.